Finally, be strong in the Lord and in his mighty power. Put on the full armor of God so that you can take your stand against the devil's schemes. For our struggle is not against flesh and blood, but against the rulers, against the authorities, against the powers of this dark world, and against the spiritual forces of evil in the heavenly realms. Therefore, put on the full armor of God, so that when the day of evil comes, you may be able to stand your ground, and after you have done everything, to stand. So this is the introduction to what is probably one of the most famous dialogues of all of Paul's letters to the churches. He's writing to the church of Ephesus, and he's wanting to teach them how they can be the church or the people that God wants them to be. And he opens it up in Ephesians chapter 6, verse 10 by saying, "Be strong in the Lord and in his mighty power." If you remember in Philippians 4:13, which I believe actually comes later on, Ephesians, but he says, we can do all things through Christ who strengthens us. And this kind of has the same idea. He's saying, be strong in the Lord and in his mighty power. He wants to remind us that as Christians, as a joint community of Christians, as a church, we need to be strong in the Lord and realize that he has power over everything. He created everything, so even when the devil comes at us, that God will win. He is stronger than the devil, no matter what we think. Whenever we have a problem, no problem is too big for God. So we have to be strong in the Lord and in the mighty power that he has. But as we see throughout the rest of this introduction and the verses that follow, we're going to see that even though God is stronger, that doesn't mean the battle is over. We know who the final victor will be, but the battle is not over yet, and we are members of the army that will be on God's side in that battle. So Paul is going to tell us how to properly get ready for that battle. This first verse, where he's telling us this is our call to action. He's saying, be strong in the Lord and in his mighty power. He goes on and says, put on the full armor of God, so that you can take your stand against the devil's schemes. That Greek word for put on, it is endusathe. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right, but endusathe, it has a sense of permanence to it. Whenever Paul tells us to put on the armor, when he tells us to endusathe that armor, I don't know if I'm using that right, but he's telling us, put it on permanently and never take it off. Back in the Roman times, that would have been something that was kind of understood, because it was like if you were ever in a place that was liable to being attacked, you had to always be ready. So you had to be ready to put that armor on, or you just had to have it on already, so that whenever you were attacked, you were ready to fight, ready to go. It was kind of like the Minutemen of early America. You had to be ready to fight. So he's telling us, put on that full armor of God. Put it on permanently and never take it off. This armor that he's going to go on to describe is something we are supposed to constantly be wearing throughout our entire lives, so that we can take our stand against the devil's schemes. We have to stand up to the devil. That word for schemes is methodeos, and that is a word that implies cunningness and deception, and just being really good at deception and being crafty, and that's what the devil is. All of his schemes, all of the way he goes about tricking us are deceptive and tricky, and they're just very crafty. Like, that's what it is. That's the word he's using. He's using methodeos, very methodical. That's where method comes from, methodeos. He's saying we need to permanently put on that armor so we can stand up against the devil's schemes. And what are these schemes? These schemes are all the temptations, all the sin, all the false religion, all the false theologies, all the worldly enticement out there. Those are the things we have to stand up against. Because as Christians, we're supposed to be resolute in our faith. We're supposed to have on this armor that we're going to go on to describe later. And we're going to see that we have to be able to stand up against all of that. As we read in 2 Corinthians 4:4, the devil, Satan, is described as the god of this age, because he rules the world. We live in a very wicked world. The world now is kind of like the world was back in the time of Noah. It's wicked. It's sinful. We deserve punishment. But God has taken our punishment. But for the rest of the world, it's a very wicked world. And Satan is the god of this age. He is the leader of the world and its ways. So that means whenever we stand up against his schemes, we are standing up against the world. We are standing up like shining lights in the darkness. That is what this is telling us. And then Paul goes on to say, for our struggle is not against flesh and blood, but against the rulers, against the authorities, against the powers of this dark world, and against the spiritual forces of evil in the heavenly realms. Paul's reminding us that this isn't a physical fight. We are not physically punching Satan in the face, because that's not how it is. It's a spiritual fight. It's kind of like when David went to fight Goliath. Even though that literally was a physical fight, he didn't need physical armor. When Saul tried to give David physical armor, David said, no, all I need is this sling and my belief in God, and God will protect me. That's how we need to do, what we need to do, and how we need to go about things when we go out into the world. We need to say, no, we are going to stand up, and we're going to have this armor on. And we're going to be wearing this armor that is described in the next few verses, and we're going to be going out into the world clad in this armor, ready for battle, so that no matter what schemes the devil throws at us, we will be ready. Paul says that it's against the rulers, against the authorities, because like we said, Satan is the god of this age. The rulers out there, the authority figures, a lot of them are being worked by the devil. A lot of the rules that we have, a lot of the reason why this world is just falling apart is because the devil is the person guiding it all. And he wants to see this world burn because God created it, and he wants to destroy what God created. Every single thing the devil does is for our destruction. So that's why we're going out there. We need to have on this armor so that we can fight back. And we have to realize, it also goes on to say that it's against the spiritual forces in the heavenly realms. Whenever we're talking about spiritual forces in the heavenly realms, that's the stuff that we can't see visibly, but we can still feel the sting. That's the stuff that's going to make us feel guilty later on. That's the stuff that might not seem bad, but it is, and we realize that at a later time. That's the stuff like sexual perversion, like cults, like worshiping Satan himself. That's the type of stuff we're talking about here. Because all of this stuff is stuff that we as Christians are going to be fighting against. Fighting for ourselves and fighting for others and fighting for God. That is how we have to live our lives. This is basically the brief of the battle. This is who is in the battle and why we're having to fight them. Or who we are in the battle and why we have to fight them. Why we are even in the battle in the first place. This is our brief. This is Paul telling us, I've called you to action, but now it's time for you to be prepared. That's why you have to put on this armor, because you can't just go into a battle not knowing what you're doing. You have to go in there knowing where you stand so that when the day of evil comes, as we'll read in the next verse, you'll be ready. Paul says, therefore, put on the full armor of God so that when the day of evil comes, you may be able to stand your ground, and after you have done everything, to stand. He says that when the day of evil comes, and for us, that is every day. Every time the devil tries to trick us, we need to be ready. That is the day of evil. The day of evil is here, and it has been for a while. We are in those days where we have to have that armor on, and we have to be prepared. And he says, you may be able to stand your ground, and after you've done everything, to stand. He says that when that comes, we need to be able to stand up for ourselves. And even after we have done everything, even once we are weakened because we have done everything in our human capabilities, we still need to be able to stand. And that tells us that if we're that weak and we have done everything we can do, the only person allowing us to still stand is God, who will be found in this armor that keeps us standing upright. That is what Paul is reminding us of. And that's why he's saying it again. Therefore, put on the full armor of God. It's been 3 verses, and he's told us twice, put on that armor. It's important. And that's why in these next few verses that we're going to go on in the next few videos in this series, we're going to talk about why we need this armor, why he chose these specific pieces of armor to represent these certain aspects of our faith. And that is the whole point of this series. Why must we be part of this battle? We're Christians. We're saved. What is it? Why is this our job to be in this battle? Like, Jesus already took care of the battle, we thought, right? Isn't that what it is? The whole point of this series is to talk about why we still have to fight, why the fight is not over. And this is just the introduction. This is Paul telling us. He's calling us to action. He's preparing us for the battle, and he's briefing us on the battle itself. And then he's giving us one final encouragement. He's telling us, when the day of evil comes, you will be ready. And that's it. That is the introduction. And then in the next few videos, we're going to go over each piece of the armor individually, and we're going to discuss how each piece should affect our lives and how we should use those to implement it into others' lives and to grow in our faiths, grow in our relationship with God, and grow with others. This is the armor of God, and Paul is going to describe what we do with that armor.